I arrived at the Airbnb just after sunset. It was a charming 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place that felt safe and lived in. The pictures in the listing had shown a cozy living room, a well-stocked kitchen, and a spacious bedroom with soft lighting. It was perfect for the week-long stay I had planned while I worked remotely. The host, Richard, had left a welcome note on the kitchen counter along with a basket of snacks. "Make yourself at home. Let me know if you need anything. Enjoy your stay." I set my bags down and took a look around. The house was warm and inviting, with wooden floors and old-fashioned furniture that gave it a rustic charm. Everything seemed normal, except for a strange creaking sound that echoed from somewhere downstairs. I paused. The house had no basement mentioned in the listing. Maybe it was just the foundation settling or the wind shifting against the walls. I shook off the feeling and went to unpack. That night, I locked the front door, double-checked the windows, and crawled into bed. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable, and within minutes, I drifted into sleep. A noise woke me sometime after midnight. A slow, deliberate creak came from downstairs, near the living room. My heart pounded as I held my breath, straining to hear if it continued. The house was still, too still. I sat up, listening, but when nothing followed, I convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe the house was old, or the heating system was kicking in. With a deep breath, I forced myself to lie back down. Sleep didn't come easy after that. The next morning, I walked downstairs to make coffee, my mind still lingering on the sound from the night before. The house felt different now, like something was just slightly off. As I moved toward the bookshelf in the living room, my foot hit a spot on the floor that felt hollow. I stopped. Kneeling down, I ran my fingers along the floorboards, pressing down on the wood. It gave slightly under my touch. That's when I saw it. A faint seam in the floor, almost imperceptible, running in a small rectangular shape. A hidden door. My stomach tightened. I hadn't noticed it the night before. Why wasn't this mentioned in the listing? Carefully, I gripped the edges and pulled. The wooden panel lifted with ease, revealing a narrow, pitch-black staircase leading down. A musty smell wafted up, like old wood and damp air. I should have closed it right then, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The steps creaked under my weight as I descended, dust swirling in the dim light. The basement was small, with concrete walls and a low ceiling. At the center of the room was an old wooden chair. It faced the far wall, positioned as if someone had been sitting there, staring into the darkness. My throat went dry. Then I saw the camera, mounted high in the corner, its lens pointed directly at the chair. A chill ran through me. It wasn't old or covered in dust. It looked new. I scanned the basement quickly. There was no furniture, no storage boxes, nothing else down here. Just the chair and the camera. I turned to leave, but then I noticed the scuff marks on the floor. Dark, smeared streaks as if something or someone had been dragged. My breath hitched. What the hell was this place? I bolted up the stairs, slamming the panel shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I stood there, heart pounding against my ribs. This was wrong. This wasn't normal. I grabbed my phone to call the host, but then I hesitated. What if Richard already knew? What if he had been the one using that chair? A terrible thought crept into my mind. What if someone had been sitting in that chair last night, watching, listening? I had to get out. I rushed upstairs, threw my clothes into my suitcase, and was zipping it shut when my phone buzzed. A message from Richard. "Hope you're settling in. Let me know if you need anything." I stared at the screen, my skin crawling. His timing was too perfect. Like he knew I had just discovered the basement. My fingers hovered over the reply button. Should I confront him? Ask him what the hell that room was? No, I needed to leave first. As I reached for my suitcase, There was a knock at the front door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. I froze. Who the hell would be visiting this early? I crept toward the window, my pulse roaring in my ears. Peeking through the blinds, I expected to see Richard, or maybe a neighbor. Instead, there was a man. He was dressed in dark clothing, his hands shoved into his pockets. His face was turned slightly away, but something about him made my stomach turn. He knocked again, harder this time. I backed away from the door. I didn't know this man. He hadn't said anything, hadn't called out, just knocked. I grabbed my phone and dialed Richard's number, straight to voicemail. The man outside shifted his weight. He stepped forward, reaching for the doorknob. I grabbed my suitcase and bolted for the back door. The second I stepped outside, I knew I was being watched. I hurried toward my car, fumbling with the keys, throwing nervous glances over my shoulder. The man hadn't followed me, at least not yet. The moment I was inside, I locked the doors and started the engine. My hands were trembling as I put the car in drive. As I pulled away, I glanced back at the house one last time. The man was still standing at the front door, watching me leave. I drove for miles before I finally pulled over at a gas station to catch my breath. My phone buzzed again, another message from Richard. I noticed you left early. Everything okay? I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen, trying to process everything that had happened. The hidden basement, the chair, the camera, the scuff marks, the man. I checked the Airbnb listing again. It had been deleted, gone, like it had never existed. I reported it to Airbnb, but I never heard anything back. The house wasn't listed again. I searched online, but I couldn't find anything about Richard or the property. It was as if the whole place had disappeared. But I know what I saw, and I still wonder who had been sitting in that chair, and what had happened to the last guest who found that basement door. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. A remote Airbnb cabin, deep in the woods, away from the city noise and distractions. No neighbors, no traffic, no responsibilities. Just me, a stack of books, and a long weekend to unwind. The listing was perfect. A simple, well-maintained cabin surrounded by thick trees, with a small lake about a mile away. The host assured me that the cabin was completely private. No one for miles, the description had read. That was exactly what I needed. The drive was long, mostly winding roads through dense forest. As I turned off the paved highway onto a gravel path, I felt a small thrill of isolation. No cell service, no nearby houses, just me and the wild. By the time I arrived, the sun was starting to dip below the treetops. The cabin was even better than I expected. Modest but charming, with a covered porch, large windows, and a wood-burning stove inside. I took a deep breath of the crisp evening air before unloading my bags. The first night was uneventful. After making a simple dinner, I settled onto the couch with a book, the warm glow of the fireplace flickering across the wooden walls. The only sounds were the occasional crackling of the fire and the faint rustling of the trees outside. I went to bed early, feeling at peace. I woke suddenly, not sure why. The room was dark, but something felt off. My heart was pounding, though I couldn't remember a nightmare. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic creaking, like footsteps but distant. I sat up, holding my breath. The sound seemed to be coming from outside, near the porch. I reminded myself that I was in the middle of the woods. There were animals out here, a deer maybe, a raccoon. Still, a deep unease settled in my chest. I listened for several minutes, but the sound eventually stopped. Just the woods, I told myself. I forced my body to relax, sank back into the pillows, and drifted back to sleep. The next morning was bright and crisp. I had almost forgotten the unease from the night before. Laughing at myself, I brewed some coffee and stepped onto the porch. The fresh air filled my lungs, and the only sounds were the distant calls of birds. Then I noticed something. In the dirt below the bathroom window, there were footprints. Human footprints. My stomach tightened. The prints weren't old, they were crisp, clearly defined. Someone had been standing right outside the bathroom window, watching. I scanned the trees, searching for any sign of movement. The forest was still, too still. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe the footprints were old. Maybe they belonged to a past guest. Maybe. I forced myself to shake it off. I was letting my imagination get the best of me. I spent the day hiking, exploring the lake, trying to enjoy the peaceful setting. But a small part of my mind wouldn't let go of the footprints. As the sun began to set, I decided to double-check all the cabin's locks. I told myself it was just a precaution. The front and back doors were both secure. The windows all had locks, and I made sure each one was latched. I felt better, at least until I went to brush my teeth. The bathroom was small, with a single mirror above the sink and a window beside it. The window was closed, the glass slightly fogged from the shower I had taken earlier. I leaned down to rinse my mouth. When I straightened up and glanced at the mirror, I saw him. A man's face, outside the window. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around so fast I nearly knocked over the sink. But the window was empty. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the glass. The reflection of the dim bathroom light made it difficult to see, but there was no movement. Had I imagined it? I took a slow step toward the window, peering out into the darkness. My own reflection stared back at me. The trees beyond the cabin swayed slightly in the breeze, their branches casting shifting shadows. Nothing else. I was shaken, but I tried to convince myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. After all, I had been uneasy ever since I saw the footprints. Maybe my paranoia had created a phantom face in the window. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, watching me. I left the bathroom, turned off every light in the cabin except for the one in my bedroom, and crawled under the blankets, telling myself it was just my imagination. I barely slept. Every small creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind outside made my nerves jump. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning. At some point, I must have drifted off. A noise pulled me from sleep. A soft top, 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 like fingertips against glass. I turned my head slowly toward the bedroom window. My breath caught in my throat. A shadow stood outside. I couldn't see details, just the outline of a figure, backlit by the moonlight filtering through the trees. The tapping continued. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, locked in pure terror. I wanted to scream, to run, to hide, but all I could do was stare as the shadow lingered outside the window. Then, slowly, it stepped back into the darkness. Gone. I lay there, unmoving, for what felt like hours. Eventually, the first light of dawn crept through the trees, painting the cabin in pale morning light. Only then did I dare to move. I packed my things in record time. I didn't care about the refund. I didn't care about anything except leaving. As I rushed outside to throw my bag in the car, I glanced toward the bedroom window. Footprints, fresh ones, leading from the forest to my window. I sped away from the cabin, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town. Later, I contacted the Airbnb host. I didn't tell them everything, just that I had been uncomfortable and left early. Their reply chilled me to the bone. "Oh, I'm so sorry. No one has rented the cabin in a few months. I hope the caretaker didn't disturb you while checking in on the place." I stared at my phone, my skin crawling. There had been no mention of a caretaker in the listing. And if someone had been there, why hadn't they knocked? Why hadn't they spoken? And most importantly, why had they just stood there watching? The Victorian house stood at the edge of a quiet neighborhood, towering over the smaller, more modern homes around it. Its steep gabled roof and ivy-covered brick walls gave it a certain charm, but there was something about it that felt heavy, like the air around it carried a weight, a lingering presence. I arrived in the late afternoon, my suitcase rattling over the uneven stone pathway leading up to the front porch. The Airbnb listing described the house as historic and full of character, which was exactly what I was looking for. A change from the usual sterile, impersonal rentals. I loved old houses, the way they creaked with age, the way their walls seemed to hold whispers of the past. The host, Margaret, was an older woman with sharp blue eyes and a firm handshake. She greeted me at the door, her expression warm but slightly guarded. "Welcome," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I hope you'll be comfortable here. The house is over 100 years old, so you might hear some noises at night, but don't let them bother you." I smiled, dragging my suitcase inside. "I love old places. I'm sure I'll be fine." Margaret gave a small nod. "I do have one rule, though. There's a room on the second floor, the last door at the end of the hall. It stays locked, and I ask that you don't try to enter it." I hesitated for just a second, surprised by the restriction. "Of course," I said, trying to sound casual. She gave me a long, searching look before handing me the key. "Enjoy your stay." Margaret left soon after, and I explored the house at my own pace. It was beautiful in an old-fashioned way: high ceilings, ornate wooden moldings, heavy antique furniture. The floors creaked beneath my feet, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and something else, something musty, like old fabric left in an attic for too long. Upstairs, the hallway stretched before me, lined with doors leading to various bedrooms and a bathroom. But it was the last door at the very end that caught my attention. The locked room. It was unremarkable, just another dark wooden door, like the others. But now that I knew it was off limits, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I shook off the curiosity and went about settling in. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, save for the occasional groan of settling wood. And then, at some point past midnight, I heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound, like something dragging lightly across the floor. It was faint, but in the absolute silence of the house, it stood out. I sat up, my heart suddenly pounding. The sound wasn't coming from outside or from the street. It was inside the house, inside the hall. It was slow, deliberate. A shuffle, then a pause. Another shuffle. I swallowed hard, straining to hear more. Then silence. For minutes, I sat frozen, waiting. When nothing else happened, I forced myself to lie back down, convincing myself it was my imagination. The house settling, the old wooden floors shifting, but I barely slept. The next morning, I told myself I had overreacted. I made coffee, walked through the house, and reassured myself that everything was perfectly normal. But as I passed the second-floor hallway, I stopped. The locked door, something about it felt different. I stepped closer, my pulse quickening. The doorknob, it was turned slightly, as if someone had tried to open it and stopped. I reached out, placing my fingers lightly against the cool brass handle. It was locked just like before. But now, standing there, I had the distinct feeling that if I turned it just a little more, it might give way. I pulled my hand back. Margaret had told me not to enter, but what was inside? That night, the noises returned. This time, I was fully awake when I heard them. Soft, slow, a dragging sound coming from the second floor. I held my breath. The sound wasn't just near the hallway. It was moving, a slow, deliberate shuffling. Something or someone was inside the locked room. I shot up in bed, my skin prickling with cold terror. Then a creak, the unmistakable sound of a door slowly opening. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at my own bedroom door, heart hammering, waiting for it to move. But it didn't. And then, just as suddenly, the noise stopped. I stayed awake until dawn. By morning, I was done pretending everything was fine. I searched the entire house, looking for explanations, checking every window, every possible draft. But there was nothing. Then, standing in the second-floor hallway, I looked at the locked door again, and I made a decision. I had to know. Using a bobby pin from my bag, I knelt down and started working on the lock. Took longer than I expected, long, tense minutes of fumbling. And then, click, the door swung open. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of dust and something else, something wrong. It was a bedroom, an old one frozen in time. A 4-poster bed, an antique dresser, a cracked mirror hanging above a fireplace, clothes scattered on the floor. And then my eyes fell on something that made my stomach drop. The bed. The sheets were pulled back, like someone had been sleeping there. I took a step back, my throat tightening. That's when I saw it, on the dusty floor, near the door. Footprints. Fresh footprints. They led from the bed to the door. And then I heard breathing. Not my own. Something low. Close. Behind me. I spun around. The door slammed shut, and the lock clicked back into place. I grabbed the doorknob and twisted desperately. It wouldn't budge. From the darkness behind me, I heard the soft creak of a floorboard shifting. Someone was in the room with me. I pounded on the door. Let me out. Silence. And then, a hand pressed against my shoulder. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember how I got out. But the next thing I knew, I was outside, running down the stone path, my suitcase forgotten inside. I never looked back. Days later, when I finally worked up the nerve, I searched for records on the house. It had once belonged to a wealthy family. The father, the mother, and their daughter. She had died in that room, but not peacefully. She had been locked inside for years, hidden away due to an illness that left her unable to care for herself. They had stopped feeding her. She had died in that bed, and she had never left. I was never one to believe in the supernatural. Ghost stories, haunted houses, urban legends, I dismissed them all. I believed in the rational, the explainable. But that changed after my stay at an Airbnb in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway, a break from the stress of work, a chance to be alone with my thoughts. The listing was promising. A modern one-bedroom apartment with a sleek design, fully furnished, and close to a few local cafes. The photos looked clean, stylish, and inviting. The price was surprisingly low, but I assumed the host was just trying to attract more guests. When I arrived, the host wasn't there to greet me. Instead, I received a message with instructions. A key under the doormat, a Wi-Fi password taped to the fridge, and a note that read, "Enjoy your stay. Let me know if you need anything." The apartment was as nice as it looked in the pictures. White walls, dark wooden floors, and minimalist furniture. A large window in the living room let in the evening sunlight, casting long shadows across the walls. The bedroom was simple. A queen-sized bed, a bedside lamp, and a closet with sliding mirrored doors. That closet caught my attention immediately. The mirrors covered the entire surface, stretching from floor to ceiling. They reflected almost the entire room, creating the illusion of more space. Something about them unsettled me, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the way they made the room feel too open, too exposed. I had never been fond of sleeping in rooms with large mirrors. It always felt like I was being watched. But I brushed off the feeling, chalking it up to exhaustion from the long drive. That night, after dinner, I decided to go to bed early. I turned off the lights and climbed under the blankets, facing away from the mirrored closet. The room was silent, except for the occasional sound of cars passing outside. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the unease lingering in my chest. Then, in the darkness, I heard it, a soft sliding sound, like something shifting. I opened my eyes, heart pounding. The room was still. Nothing seemed out of place. The closet doors were closed, their mirrored surfaces barely visible in the dim light. I sat up, listening carefully. Maybe it had just been the apartment settling, or my imagination playing tricks on me. I shook my head and lay back down, forcing myself to relax. But just as I was drifting off, I heard it again, a quiet, almost imperceptible creak. This time, I turned over quickly, eyes locking onto the mirrored doors. My breath caught in my throat. One of them was slightly open, not much, maybe an inch or two, but I was sure, absolutely sure, that I had not touched them. A cold feeling crawled up my spine. I stared at the opening, waiting for movement, for something, anything, to explain what I was seeing. But the gap remained still, just a sliver of darkness between the doors. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe the track was loose and the door had slid open on its own. Still, I got up and slid it fully shut. The door moved smoothly, no resistance, nothing unusual. I gave it a slight push to test if it would slide back open. Didn't. Feeling foolish, I climbed back into bed. It's just a door, nothing to be scared of. But sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I tried to forget about the closet. The sun was shining through the window, the room looked normal, and in the daylight, my fear from the night before felt ridiculous. I spent most of the day out, walking around the neighborhood, grabbing coffee, and sitting at a park to read. By the time I returned to the Airbnb, the sun was already setting. The moment I stepped inside, the unease returned. The apartment felt off, like the air was heavier, staler. I shook the feeling away and went about my night, cooking, watching TV, scrolling through my phone. By the time I was ready for bed, I had almost convinced myself that everything was fine. Almost. I hesitated before turning off the light, my eyes lingering on the mirrored closet doors. They were shut, perfectly aligned, just like I had left them. I sighed and got into bed, pulling the covers up to my chest. Ignore the closet. Go to sleep. But something made me turn over, a deep, nagging instinct, and when I did, my breath caught in my throat. The closet door was open again, the same small gap, just like before. I stared at it, my pulse hammering in my ears. My mind raced for an explanation. Maybe I hadn't shut it properly. Maybe the air pressure had shifted. But as I sat up, preparing to close it again, my eyes flicked to the mirror, and I froze. My reflection was there, but something was wrong. It wasn't moving. I blinked, my breath coming in short gasps. I moved my hand slightly, just a small twitch of my fingers. The reflection did nothing. It stayed completely still. My throat tightened. My chest burned with panic. I lifted my arm, slow and deliberate. My reflection remained motionless, staring straight ahead. Then, very slowly, it smiled. A cold, unnatural grin stretched across its face. I scrambled back, nearly falling off the bed. My mind screamed, "This isn't real, this isn't real," but my body didn't care. Every instinct in me was screaming to run. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the smile was gone, and the reflection moved, perfectly normal, perfectly synchronized with me. I sat there, trembling, staring at the mirror for what felt like hours. Did I imagine it? Was it a trick of the light? No, I knew what I had seen. The closet door was still open, the darkness inside stretching into nothingness. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I didn't care if I had paid for the weekend. I wasn't staying another night. But before I left, I had to check. I had to know if I was losing my mind. Heart pounding, I walked to the closet and slid the door open all the way. Nothing, just a closet, empty except for a few spare hangers. I let out a shaky breath and turned away, and caught a glimpse of something in the mirror, something inside the closet. Slowly, dreading what I would see, I turned back. The closet was still empty, but in the mirror there was something standing inside it. A shape, person. No, not a person. The thing had no features, just a blurred, shadowy figure. It stood completely still, head tilted slightly, as if studying me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then I stepped forward. I didn't think. I grabbed my bag and ran. I didn't stop until I was in my car, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The Airbnb host texted me later, asking why I had left early. I never responded. I don't know what I saw in that mirror. I don't want to know, and I will never stay in a place with mirrored closets again. The Airbnb was in a quiet part of town, a modest but modern one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a small complex. It was the kind of place that looked cozy in the listing photos, soft lighting, neutral colors, and clean lines. I was in town for a short work trip, and I wanted somewhere peaceful to stay. Hotels were too impersonal, and I liked the idea of a homier space. The host, Mark, was friendly but seemed rushed when he greeted me. He handed over the key, gave a quick tour, and then, as we stood in the hallway, he hesitated. "One thing," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "The second bedroom is locked. Just don't worry about it. It's for storage." I nodded. "Sure, no problem." His eyes lingered on the door for a second before he forced a smile. "Enjoy your stay." I closed the door behind him and let out a breath. Strange way to mention something so minor. The apartment itself was nice, clean, well-furnished, exactly as described. I set my suitcase down in the bedroom and unpacked a few things before making a cup of tea. As I settled onto the couch, I let my eyes wander to the hallway. The second bedroom door was closed. Just storage, I told myself. That night, I woke up to a faint noise. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, some lingering sound from whatever my mind had been playing. But then I heard it again, a soft, shuffling movement. I held my breath, straining to listen. It was coming from the hallway. The building was old, I reasoned. Maybe it was just the pipes or the wind. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket up to my chin. The sound faded, and eventually, I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I had almost forgotten about it. I made coffee, checked my emails, and planned out my day. It wasn't until I passed the second bedroom door on my way out that something made me stop. The door was cracked open. Not much, maybe an inch or two, but enough that I knew for certain it hadn't been that way before. A chill spread through my chest. Had I bumped it in my sleep? Had I left it open without realizing? I stepped forward and pushed it closed, the latch clicking softly into place. My heartbeat had quickened, but I shook it off. It was nothing, just my imagination. By the time I got back that evening, I had almost convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. That night, I heard it again, a slow, deliberate shifting sound. It was closer this time. I sat up, my body rigid, every nerve alert. My eyes flicked to the bedroom door. It was closed, but the noise was coming from the hallway, just beyond it. I reached for my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. The room was silent again, but I didn't move. Minutes passed, then a creak. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just the sound of the building settling. It was the distinct noise of weight shifting on a floorboard. I turned on my phone's flashlight, hesitated, then swung my legs over the bed. Every instinct told me to stay put, but I had to look. I gripped the doorknob, held my breath, and slowly turned it. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the kitchen night light. I stepped forward. The second bedroom door was open. I couldn't move. The door had been closed when I went to bed. I was sure of it. The darkness beyond it was thick, the kind that seemed to swallow light. I raised my phone's flashlight, my pulse hammering. The room was empty.
No furniture, no boxes.
Just bare wooden floors and plain white walls. The only thing in the room was a small pile of clothes in the corner, crumpled like someone had stepped out of them and left them behind. And they weren't old. They were clean, fresh. A shirt, a pair of jeans and socks, all arranged haphazardly, like someone had been living here. My breath hitched. My skin prickled. I backed out of the room and shut the door. This time I locked it. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Morning couldn't come fast enough. I showered, dressed, and packed my bags, ready to leave immediately. But before I walked out, I hesitated. I needed to say something to the host. I sent Mark a message. Hey, quick question. Has someone else been staying here? I heard noises at night, and the second bedroom door was open. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. Mark, you opened the door? The wording made my stomach turn. Me. It was already open when I woke up. I thought you said it was storage? Mark, it is. Just don't worry about it. Not the response I wanted. Me. Mark, there were clothes in there. Someone has been in that room. Silence. Then, Mark, don't tell me anymore. I don't want to know. A deep unease settled in my gut. I grabbed my bag and left the apartment, locking the door behind me. Hours later, as I sat in a coffee shop, still shaken, I pulled up the Airbnb listing. I scrolled through the reviews, something I hadn't done before. Most were normal, but then I saw it. A review from 3 months ago. Great place, but I didn't sleep well. The second bedroom door kept opening on its own, and I swore I heard someone breathing in there. Another, from 2 months ago. Loved the apartment, but the second bedroom creeped me out. I swear I saw shadows moving under the door at night. And then the one that made my blood run cold. Everything was fine until I woke up and saw a man standing in the hallway just outside my bedroom. Thought I was dreaming, but in the morning, the second bedroom door was open. I closed my phone. My hands were shaking. I never looked back. I was in desperate need of a break. Between work stress and the never-ending noise of the city, I felt like I was suffocating. When I found a secluded beachside Airbnb, it seemed perfect, far from the crowds, with nothing but ocean waves and salty air. The listing was simple: a one-bedroom cottage with a private deck overlooking the water. The photos showed whitewashed walls, large windows, and a wooden back door leading to the beach. It was exactly what I needed. I booked it for 4 nights. The drive was long, and by the time I arrived, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. The Airbnb host had left the key in a lockbox by the door. I punched in the code, retrieved the key, and stepped inside. The cottage was even better than I expected. Cozy but airy, with the scent of sea breeze drifting through the open windows. The floors creaked slightly under my weight, but it only added to the charm. I checked the back door. It was unlocked. I turned the deadbolt, locking it, then made sure the front door was secured as well. I didn't feel unsafe, but I was alone, miles from any town, and locking up seemed like the responsible thing to do. That night, I fell asleep to the rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the shore. The morning was peaceful. I made coffee, sat on the deck, and watched the sun rise over the water. I spent most of the day walking along the empty beach, feeling the sand between my toes and letting my mind unwind. It wasn't until evening, when I was inside making dinner, that I noticed something odd. A sound. The back door clicked. It wasn't loud, but distinct, like the gentle rattle of a handle being turned. I froze, my hands still gripping the knife I had been using to chop vegetables. I listened. Nothing. Slowly, I moved to the back door, checking the lock. It was still in place. I pulled on the handle. The door didn't budge. Had I imagined it? Maybe the wind had shaken it. I told myself that, but my nerves wouldn't settle. I finished dinner quickly, checked all the locks again, and went to bed earlier than I had planned. Morning came, and with it, a sense of embarrassment. I had spooked myself over nothing. After breakfast, I decided to take a long walk down the beach. The air was crisp, the sky clear, and I finally started to feel the relaxation I had been looking for. That feeling vanished when I returned to the cottage. At first, I didn't notice it. I stepped up onto the wooden deck, wiped the sand off my feet, and reached for the door handle. Then I looked down. There, on the floor just inside the cottage, was a wet footprint. It was unmistakable, the outline of a bare foot, slightly smudged, but fresh. A single step. I hadn't walked inside yet. My stomach clenched. Someone had been here. I pushed the door open, my eyes scanning the small space. The cottage was silent, still. Nothing seemed out of place. The back door was locked, just as I had left it. I checked the windows. Locked. No one was here. I tried to come up with an explanation. Maybe I had left some condensation on the floor the night before. Maybe it was my own footprint, and I had just not noticed it. But the shape of it, it wasn't mine. It was too big. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the unease creeping through me. That night, I decided to set up my phone to record. I placed it on the kitchen counter, camera facing the back door. If anything happened, I would have proof. I locked up, checked every window again, and climbed into bed. The night was long. Every creak of the cottage made my pulse quicken. I barely slept, but nothing happened. At dawn, I grabbed my phone and hesitated before pressing play. The footage started out normal. Just an empty kitchen, the back door in the frame, and the soft glow of the night light. I scrubbed through the video, speeding it up until something caught my eye. At 2:12 a.m., the back door handle moved. My breath hitched, turned slightly, the lock preventing it from opening. Then, slowly, the door opened an inch before immediately closing again. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The door had been locked. How had it moved? I rewound, pausing the frame as the door cracked open. And then I saw it. A hand. A gloved hand slowly reaching into the frame, gripping the edge of the door. The fingers curled around the wood, then retreated back into the darkness. My stomach lurched. I spun toward the back door. It was locked, but I knew now that didn't matter. Someone had been outside. Someone had tried to get in. I wasn't staying another night. I shoved my belongings into my bag, barely able to think straight. Every second I stayed in that cottage felt like I was waiting for something to happen again. I grabbed my phone, pulled up the Airbnb app, and messaged the host. Me. Something weird happened last night. I caught someone on camera trying to open the back door. Do you have security cameras outside? Minutes later, a response came. Host. No cameras, but that's impossible. No one else is out there. The closest neighbor is over a mile away. I sent the video. Me. Explain this. There was no reply for a long time. Then finally, host. Pack your things. Leave now. That was all I needed to hear. I threw my bag over my shoulder, unlocked the front door, and stepped out onto the deck. And then I stopped. The footprints were back. A set of fresh, wet footprints, leading from the beach to my door. They hadn't been there minutes ago. I didn't wait. I sprinted to my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking. When the engine roared to life, I hit the gas so hard the tires kicked up sand. In my rearview mirror, the cottage grew smaller. the deck, the back door, and something else. A figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching me leave. I booked the Airbnb because it was perfect for what I needed. Secluded, quiet, and just outside of town. It was a small guest house, advertised as a private rental behind a larger, unoccupied main home. The photos showed a cozy, modern space with all the essentials. A small kitchen, a comfortable bed, a simple living area. The host, a man named Daniel, had excellent reviews but wasn't very communicative beyond sending the check-in instructions. I arrived just before sunset. The property was tucked away down a narrow gravel road, lined with towering trees on both sides. It was peaceful, almost too quiet. The guest house itself was exactly as described. A small single-story building with a porch overlooking a large, empty backyard. The main house, a much larger two-story home, sat about 50 yards away. The house was dark, windows shut, no signs of life. Just as the listing described, it was unoccupied. I let myself into the guest house, tossing my bag onto the bed. Everything inside was clean and tidy. The scent of fresh linen lingered in the air. A welcome note from Daniel was on the small wooden table. "Welcome. Make yourself at home. Let me know if you need anything." Simple. Nothing out of the ordinary. I made a quick dinner, watched a show on my laptop, and settled in for the night. The silence was almost overwhelming, but I told myself I'd get used to it. Then, around 11:30 p.m., I heard it. A noise, faint, distant, coming from the main house. A soft thump, like something shifting upstairs. I froze, listening. Silence. Maybe an animal? A branch falling? I didn't know, but something about it unsettled me. I shook it off and went to bed. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. Something had startled me. I wasn't sure what at first, just an odd feeling, a heaviness in my chest. Then I heard it again, a soft creak, a floorboard shifting, not inside the guest house, outside, right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, heart pounding. The only thing separating me from whoever or whatever was out there was a thin wooden door. My mind raced through possibilities. Had I locked the front door? I thought I had. Was it an animal? A raccoon, maybe? Then, another sound. Soft, careful footsteps on the porch. Someone was walking outside. I stayed completely still, barely breathing. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps stopped. The silence stretched on. I reached for my phone, hands shaking, and checked the time again. 2:53 a.m. I didn't move for another 10 minutes. Then, as quietly as I could, I slipped out of bed and crept to the front door. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness. No movement. I turned the lock, just in case. By morning, the fear had dulled into unease. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined the sounds, that it had been the wind or maybe an animal scurrying across the porch. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I decided to explore the property a bit in daylight, if only to reassure myself. The main house stood eerily silent, its windows dark and lifeless. I walked around its perimeter, peering inside when I could. Empty rooms, dusty furniture. Nothing looked recently used. Then I noticed something strange. At the back of the house, beneath the overhang of the second floor, was a door. A small, almost unnoticeable entrance leading into the house. It was different from the main doors. It had no handle on the outside, just a keyhole. A hidden entrance. I stared at it, a chill running through me. Why would an empty house need a secret door? I wanted to ignore it, to go back to the guest house and pretend I hadn't seen it. But something about it felt wrong. I tried the knob even though I knew it would be locked. Turned. The door creaked open. Inside was a narrow hallway. The air was stale, thick with dust. My pulse quickened as I stepped forward, my footsteps muffled by the old wooden floor. I passed a small storage closet, a stairwell leading up, and then a sound, a whisper. I froze, came from upstairs. I turned to leave, my gut screaming at me to get out. But just as I reached the door, something caught my eye. On the wall, just near the stairs, was a series of small screens. Security monitors. 5 of them, each showing a different view of the property. The backyard, the driveway, the front of the guest house, and one showing the inside of the guest house. My bedroom, my stomach twisted. Someone had been watching me. The realization hit all at once. The sounds in the night, the feeling of being watched, the hidden door. I wasn't alone. I stepped closer, heart hammering, eyes locked on the screen displaying my bedroom. It was a live feed showing my empty bed, the slightly rumpled sheets from where I had slept. The camera had to be inside the room, hidden somewhere. My breath hitched, then movement. A shadow shifted in the lower corner of the screen. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, and then I saw it. A figure, someone crawling out from under my bed. I stumbled backward, knocking over a small chair. The sound echoed through the house, and then a sharp creak from upstairs. Whoever was in the house had heard me. I bolted, sprinting back through the hallway, out the hidden door, and across the yard toward my car. My hands fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life. In the rearview mirror, I saw movement at the window of the main house. A man, watching me. I tore down the gravel road, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station miles away. Hands shaking, I called the police. When they arrived at the property, the main house was empty. The guest house was empty, but inside the main house they found something chilling. A makeshift living space in the attic. A sleeping bag, food wrappers, a backpack full of clothes. Someone had been living there, watching. The security system was traced back to the host, Daniel. But when the police tried to contact him, he was gone, vanished. His Airbnb account was deleted, his phone disconnected. The address linked to his name led to an abandoned house in another state. It was as if he had never existed. A week later, I received an email. No subject, just one sentence. You left too soon.